Reaction. This is Sweden had enough of Russia. Get out of Ukraine. But channel the military show. Okay. The thumbnail feels like a bit too extreme. I don't want to say clickbaity, but a bit extreme the way thumbnail is shown. But I don't know. Maybe it's real. Maybe Sweden. I saw the task and purpose video about like how 800,000 NATO members are like preparing to like be at the border. Maybe Sweden is also like screw it, going too strong. This is not a good sign, right? I mean, I don't know. I mean, it depends on how you see it. But any war is not a good sign of any kind, right? Obviously, after the level of Russian aggression in Ukraine, people are not just going to sit on their ass. Things are going to happen. But yeah, things are just escalating, isn't it? When you think like, okay, things dying down, maybe things going to get better. Maybe people will come to like on the table, discussing thing, diplomatic channel. No. Yeah, things are just increasing. I don't know. What Sweden had enough of what? Like, are they actually joining or something, or like supplying now? Because Sweden has been like neutral, right? Since the Napoleonic time, I'm pretty sure that's the case, right? Napoleon's one of the marshals, or like kind of like a king of Sweden, since their family has been like kind of like a monarchy style thing there. And Sweden is one of those countries who always been neutral somewhat. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. I'm pretty sure Sweden joined NATO in this year, right? Pretty sure early this year, Sweden just recently joined NATO. So I guess that's the reason behind it. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. Let's watch it.
In a stunning move that has left Moscow reeling, Sweden has delivered a crippling blow to Russian forces, shifting the tides of the conflict in Ukraine. This unprecedented aid package from Sweden, NATO's newest member, marks a historic departure from its traditional stance of neutrality. What secret strategies and cutting-edge technologies has Sweden unveiled to support Ukraine? How will this affect the balance of power in the region? Let's delve into the dramatic developments that have sent shockwaves through the Kremlin and bolstered Ukraine's fight for freedom. On May 29th, Sweden announced its 16th aid package to Ukraine. Tellingly, this was primarily a military rather than an economic or humanitarian aid package. It is designed to create Russian casualties, which would have been unthinkable for Sweden a few years ago. Such aid is a departure from Sweden.
I mean, that is a big deal because people send aid that disguise something like, oh, this is humanitarian aid. But when you send military aid, like that's a clear message. Sometimes people just out of fear of Russia doesn't do that. But Sweden basically like screw it, joining NATO and like literally sending military aid like other big countries like, you know, like USA and others are doing. That's a big step, right? Especially how Sweden had neutrality thing. I don't know what Putin tried to do with the Ukraine thing, but he clearly did one thing that like send Sweden in opposite side. That's definitely, it was a neutral country. Now it's not, right?
Traditional foreign policy. Until Putin decided to invade Ukraine, Stockholm observed a policy of neutrality dating back to the Napoleonic Wars. The last time Sweden entered a conflict was in the Swedish-Norwegian War of 1814. The Swedish public widely supported their country's neutrality, and it was maintained during both world wars. As late as 2012, only 17% of Swedes expressed support for joining NATO. By 2021, the number increased to 46%. But Sweden was always wary of the threat from Russia. The two countries fought the long and bitter Great Northern War in the early 18th century over influence in the Baltic Sea. Sweden lost the
Yeah, that's the Peter the Great one, right? I saw the extra history video on it, series, 5-video series. I guess 3 or so years ago. I still remember that, how it ended and everything. It was something, right? Catherine the Great's inspiration, right? Which was Peter the Great. I mistaken Peter the Third for the Peter the Great at one time, but then I realized like, oh, that's not the same thing. Yeah, so Peter the Great was the inspiration for Catherine the Great. Both are the great because they did a lot of shit like that. But that was some insane war, the Great Northern War. But yeah, since then, like, you know, since the Napoleonic times and all that, right, they've been kind of like neutral until now, which is like when you realize these historic events are happening that didn't happen for centuries, that's a kind of big deal. You don't really feel it, but yeah, over the time, few decades from now, even multiple decades from now, people realize how this time, basically 2020s, was a big deal, how it changed things. We are living through that time, which is insane.
Conflict and has been on guard against Russia ever since. As early as 1904, Sweden was patrolling the Baltic with submarines to protect its coastline. That mission has given it more underwater experience in the Baltic than any other nation. The Gripen fighter was designed specifically to counter the threat from Russia. Even its radar system is designed to let it look toward Russian territory without flying in its direction. Fear of potential
The
Russian
fuck? What? You're kidding me, right? So there's an actual plane whose whole job is to look at Russia. That's very specific. No, the plane is like that. So even if you're not in the direction that radar is looking at Russia, what is it doing? What's that doing? Right? I didn't know Sweden was such a great military power in that way. It creates a great equipment like planes and like submarines. I realized that recently in past year or so, which kind of surprised me, but yeah, it makes sense.
aggression has entered Swedish cultural consciousness. Some of the older locals on Gotland Island, one of the most important locations in the Baltic and the likeliest place in Sweden that Russia would attack, reported in 2015 that they would hear stories from their parents warning that if they failed to finish their dinners, the Russians would get them. Back then, people on the island were divided over whether Swedish military should increase their presence.
What the hell is that? If you don't eat your food and finish your thing, if you don't go to sleep early, Russians will come and get you, right? Boris is coming for you. Boris, what is a Russian name, right? That's coming to get you.
There. No such divisions exist today. Putin's decision to invade Ukraine reawakened historical nightmares among the Swedish public and policymakers in Stockholm. Sweden announced its intention to join NATO a few months later and quickly became a partner to help Ukraine fend off the invasion. Like Germany, Sweden reversed its historical aversion to providing lethal military aid. It began with providing weapons like anti-material weapons, air defenses, and light vehicles. The investments increased and
German thing is not if you look at it in a different way, German thing is not as big as Sweden thing, but it kind of is because Germany, World War II, I mean, come on, that's a big change. So both are historic changes, right? It all took one guy just going extreme after multiple decades of relative peace in Europe to do something unthinkable, to fall dominoes in a way that it changes all the landscape, right? Most countries are lowering their military ambitions in a way, right? Even US is like, let's not make too much F-22. Let's lower the budget for F-35 before all this shit happened. Now they're like, oh, let's ramp everything up. Germany is doing that, US is doing that. Everybody's just ramping up military thing now.
Sweden demonstrated early on that it was willing to go far in its proportional investment in money and weaponry. On the first anniversary of the war, Sweden said it would donate 10 Leopard 2A5 tanks to Ukraine. Sweden's latest aid package is worth $1.23 billion. To put that into perspective, Sweden's total military spending in 2023 was $8.75 billion. Meanwhile, Sweden's total aid to Ukraine amounts to a little over $4 billion over the course of 16 packages since the invasion started. Such a proportionally large expenditure demonstrates Stockholm's threat perception.
Yeah, that's a big package compared to others, right? Like in a way, like that's a big portion. But their numbers become so weird. Like, how much money does US spend in military? Like hundreds of billions of dollars in defense. Most of them goes to military. Compared to countries like Sweden, who just spends 8 billion, which is like close to nothing. But even with those 8 billions, right? Even with those 8 billions, how much things they make with the planes and things. Sweden is really a powerhouse in that way. But with just 8 billion, that is surprising.
Russia's recent successes have required Stockholm to step up its spending even more. The pace of Sweden's separate aid packages also reflects Stockholm's wariness, as several have been passed in the last few months and they have significantly increased in size. For example, in late February, Sweden announced an $82 million aid package, which was then its largest. The package included 10 CB-90 combat boats, 20 group boats, underwater weapons, $192 million worth of badly needed artillery shells, RBS-70 man-portable air defense systems, anti-tank missiles, Carl Gustaf grenade launchers, hand grenades, and medical supplies. Early in May, Sweden passed aid to help Ukraine secure its energy supply, since this section has been a particular target for Russian missiles and drones. This aid will be spent on equipment like generators, transformers, and solar cells. Will also include necessary spare parts like electrical switches, cables, pumps, and pipes. The May 29th aid package was about twice the size of the February aid package. It does not include donations of the JAS-39 Gripen fighter jet. Although Ukraine has expressed interest in this platform in the past and does not rule it out in the future, Kyiv wants to focus on implementing its F-16 program. Stockholm says that it's still working on the possibility of contributing the Gripen system later, but for now it's too much of an ask for Ukraine to divide itself between the two new fighter jet programs. Though it won't be able to donate fighter aircraft, the rest of the aid is substantial. Sweden's Deputy Prime Minister, Ebba Busch, said that the package consists of equipment that is at the top of Ukraine's priority list. Maybe the most important contribution for the immediate term is in the form of additional 155mm artillery shells. Sweden didn't specify how many shells will be provided, but the new ammunition will help to swell Ukraine's supply to well over 2 million rounds. This will ensure enough ammunition to keep Ukraine in the fight into 2025. The Swedes will also be donating RB-99 AMRAAM missiles, the equivalent of the AIM-120. Sweden's Ministry of Defense says that these missiles will be repurposed specifically to serve in ground-based anti-aircraft systems. Presumably, they'll be supplied for Ukraine's NASAMS units. This is important because Russia took to using its aviation to more effectively support its ground forces after Avdiivka fell, and the proper air support enabled Russian forces to make more rapid advances to the west. Ukraine used its NASAMS and other air defense units to shoot down some of the Russian planes. More ammunition will check Russian aviation.
This is all effed up in a way, right? Because you can supply any country with like ammunition, weapons. Russia can create their own ammunition, weapons, but you can't create humans that fast, right? All this feels like war's gonna stretch out even longer. Like, can Ukraine and Russia both sustain humans basically for that long? Russia was already short on humans after World War II, right? Even today, like their population is not that great. I don't know how good, even Ukraine's population not that great, right? So the longer war stretches, the threat rises of nuclear warfare, because if you lose a lot of things, at that point, like fuck it, that's how Russia can see things, or at least Putin can see things, which is like fucked up, right? If their back is against the wall too much, that's a big issue. And more than that, like how longer can both sides fight war? Right, and there is I think there's a threshold after which, like, if war stretches out longer, enough human loss happens, escalation and like frustration rises, people do certain things that makes other countries join in directly. That could result in like a mini world war or mini global war, whatever you want to say it, which can also result in things like this. But yeah, I think biggest issue Ukraine faced was through like short of supplies very recently. That's why Zelensky was constantly in US and asking for aid package. Sweden can at least supply that, knowing how much artillery Russia makes. Artillery is going to be the biggest issue for Ukraine, which is like good. Sweden is supplying them. So yeah.
And force Moscow to be more cautious with its air power. Sweden will also be sending its entire fleet of PBV-302 infantry fighting vehicles to Ukraine. These have been retired from Swedish service as the newer Combat Vehicle 90 replaced the PBV-302 in 2014. Stockholm thought it better to donate.
I mean, is that gonna help? They're fighting with like like M2s and whatever that is, right, from USA, and like Russia also has their like decent enough infantry vehicles. This old style infantry vehicle, is that going to help? Like, I don't know, at certain point, like anything I can get on hand is fine type of way, but still.
Its older vehicles rather than keep them in storage. Sweden's official announcement of the aid mentioned that the Ukrainian army was organizing several new brigades and needed armored vehicles for their infantry companies, a demand the PBV-302 will help to satisfy. The PBV-302 is armed with a 20mm cannon mounted on a turret to the vehicle's right side. The cannon can be fed with drum magazines, which can each hold 30 rounds. A 7.62mm machine gun can be used as a secondary weapon. It has armor that can withstand 20mm rounds and weighs 12.3 tons. It comes with a crew of 3, the driver, who also serves as a mechanic, the gunner, and the commander. The vehicle can carry up to 8 soldiers in its landing compartment. Over 600 of these vehicles were produced between 1966 and 2014, but that's not the amount Ukraine will receive. Much of the fleet was decommissioned from 2005 onward. By 2018, there were at least 180 still in service in various degrees of readiness. These vehicles are likely the ones Sweden will now hand over to Ukraine. The vehicles are all set to be repaired and modernized to at least some extent before the transfer. The remaining spare parts and maintenance equipment for these vehicles will be donated as part of the package, as will the 20mm shells for the onboard cannons. The PBV-302 will not be the only land vehicles Sweden donates as part of its latest package. The aid also includes surplus fuel transport vehicles in use by the Swedish Armed Forces. Previously donated Swedish material will continue to get upkeep through this aid package. Stockholm intends to help Kyiv with its command and control through donations of terminals with subscriptions for satellite communications. To help with training and military doctrine, the Swedish Defense Research Agency will assist the Ukrainian Armed Forces in creating their own Defense Research Institute. There are also a number of financial support provisions in the package. Most importantly, Sweden will make investments to ensure that Ukraine can get aid on a large scale on a rapid basis. Sweden will permit all of the weapons provided by this package to be used against targets on Russian soil if that's what Ukraine finds proper. Stockholm also claims that it will be able to replenish all of the ammunition and equipment it's sending to Ukraine through new investments. The most notable contribution in the package came in the form of 2 Saab ASCC-890 airborne early warning and control planes. Swedish Defense Minister Pål Jonson said that these aircraft would have the most significant impact on Ukraine's air defense network. These planes will better allow you.
I mean, it's Saab, so hope so. Knowing Saab, I bet it's gonna get hit by some missile launcher and just like brush it off. Like, yeah, we thought of this. We can take 10 of that.
Ukraine to identify and track incoming missiles and drones. They can also spot targets of opportunity for offensive operations. Training Ukrainian Air Force personnel to fly these planes is also part of the Swedish aid package. Stockholm's decision to donate these aircraft was a significant step beyond the monetary cost. These were the only 2 AWACS aircraft in Sweden's fleet. The Swedes admitted that the donation of these planes and many other provisions in the package meant a temporary vulnerability in their territorial defense.
Yeah, that surprised me, not gonna lie. You donate something without having planned to like secure your own thing. That's like USA giving all their F-22s to Ukraine without like making 6th generation one type of way. I know that's like an extreme example, but still. Usually when global politics happens, people always have their own interests first and then everything else, which is the same thing here in a way, where every country supplies Ukraine because they're afraid of Russia in the first place. Like after Ukraine, what if they come for us type of way. But still, it's pretty weird time we live in, right? Like way too many countries are helping Ukraine. Like in the past, that hasn't been the case, right? In the past, sure, like you have few allies that helps you, but not at this scale. When I know because of organizations like NATO and things, it changes things. But then again, Ukraine is not in NATO. And like I said, it's all based on self-preservation. Like you want to deter Russia, but still like supplying at this level, especially Sweden, they only have these 2 planes and they're like, fuck it, Ukraine can have them. It's vulnerability on our side, but we'll see about it later. That's some extra next level thing, right? Because I don't think any country has done that level of thing yet. Who's like, okay, even if it's a minus point for us, we're gonna give you.
However, they decided to take what Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson called a calculated risk. Perhaps the words of his Danish counterpart, Mette Frederiksen, came to mind. Early in 2024, she pointed out that it was better for European countries to sacrifice their own arsenals temporarily to ensure Russia's defeat far from their own homelands, rather than having to potentially use those weapons against an emboldened Putin far closer to home. Sweden plans to make up for the shortage of command and control planes by purchasing additional S-106 GlobalEye aircraft. This is Saab's newest AWACS aircraft and entered service in 2020. Sweden also insists that it has plans to replenish all of the ammunition and other equipment it will lose once they arrive in Ukraine. Sweden intends to do this by increasing its defense spending. In September 2023, Stockholm announced its intention to increase its military budget by 28% for 2024. Additional increases will come in 2025 and 26. These increases will put Sweden over the NATO target of spending 2% of GDP on defense by appropriations. The budget increases will also likely make Sweden an enduring and reliable partner for Ukraine. Stockholm has indeed already announced that its partnership with Ukraine will be for the long haul. On May 23rd, Prime Minister Kristersson said that Sweden will be providing Ukraine with $7 billion in aid over the course of 3 years to repel the invasion. The package released to Ukraine the following week was only the first of multiple packages.
That is big when you know that their whole defense budget is 7-8 billion a year. So for next 3 years, sending $7 billion of like aid package is a big thing
to come, and those packages will likely get bigger as time goes on. Thanks to the increases in Sweden's military budget over the coming years, the country will be in position to deliver on this planned aid. The Ministry of Defense officially announced major planned investments in artillery systems and transport aircraft as part of the domestic defense spending program. These investments will put Sweden in a position to produce and deliver the weapons and ammunition Ukraine needs in the coming years. But how does Sweden's recent and coming aid impact Ukraine's ability to win the war of attrition? In December 2023, a report by the Estonian Ministry of Defense indicated that Ukraine could win the war in 2025 if it killed or maimed 100,000 Russian troops in 2024. While Russia has the ability to call many more soldiers than that to its colors, these people need to be trained properly and then assigned to a cohesive unit if they are to be effective on the battlefield. These units would quickly suffer casualties, creating even more demand for manpower that would in turn send troops to the front with even less training. It will be a vicious cycle that Russia, even with its much greater amount of available manpower than Ukraine, would not be capable of meeting. The Estonians estimated that if Ukraine met the 100,000 benchmark, it could reduce Russian training capacity to 80,000 properly trained troops per year. The rest would be ineffective cannon fodder. Sweden's donation, especially with the new artillery shells, will help Ukraine to achieve this objective. Since Ukraine killed or maimed an average of 172,000 Russian troops in each of the first 2 years of the war, this seems like it will be achievable, particularly with help from countries like Sweden. There is another side to this equation though. Ukraine must minimize its own losses, and that's where Sweden's recent aid package might make the most impact in the long run. Estonia's Ministry of Defense said that it was just as important to level up the training Ukrainian troops received from their Western allies. Over 100,000 Ukrainian troops have been trained by their Western allies since the war began. The training is not equal though. While most Western militaries have basic training courses that take 10 weeks, and then several months for more specialized tasks like demolition or sniping, most of the Ukrainian troops in the war have had only 5-week courses. Ukrainian troops have also sometimes complained that they have received improper training from their NATO allies, which have been influenced too heavily by the war on terror rather than the high-intensity state-based warfare that's taking place in Ukraine. This lack of adequate training has also ensured that Ukraine suffered about 200,000 casualties in the first 2 years of the war. Of particular importance is better training for Ukraine's officers. The Estonians recommended that foreign trainers should subject Ukrainian staff officers to a 10-week intensive training course. That way, Ukraine will be able to conduct proper operations at the brigade level. The current Ukrainian military can't do this at the...
Yeah, that is all such a heavy thing, right? It's a grim estimation on like how much soldiers should be, like casualties in order to war to end. But I always think like how far Russia can go, right? Let's say Russia suffers a lot of casualties. Now they don't have expert soldiers. How far before Russian people like screw it, like revolution type of thing? Like we are not doing this type of way, just like have an uproar, right, against Kremlin. Because there must be a threshold where people have enough. The Kremlin can just say like, okay, enough people died, like I need new batch, like it's some kind of a resource, so tap in. And people just like, yeah, fine, whatever, and like constantly go to front line. There must be a time period where it's like we had enough type of way. So how far before that shit happens? How far any country can sustain, right? I mean, that applies to both sides. How far before Ukraine suffers enough losses that they're like, okay, we can't go on unless there will be no Ukraine. It applies to both sides, right? Next 2 or so years is going to be really crucial where things go.
At the moment, which is why most operations in the war have taken place at the platoon or company level. This approach to warfare has helped to keep Ukrainian armed forces nimble, but it's also had severe limitations. The Estonian Ministry of Defense pointed out these limitations. The effective span of control of a brigade for offensive operations is therefore approximately 2 companies. The result is that the Ukrainian military plans and executes operations with a horizon of exploitation limited to approximately 1,200 meters. This assessment may have been one of the more understated reasons why the offensive in Zaporizhia last year failed, even though Ukraine was able to penetrate 2 of Russia's formidable defensive lines there. It could not translate those gains into a bigger breakthrough because of Russian mines and improved artillery fire, but also because it simply could not effectively use the necessary amount of troops to conduct operations at the level required. Russia was able to summon reinforcements with helicopter support that halted the momentum of Ukraine's troops. Being able to bring more of them forward in a cohesive operation could have made the difference in generating the necessary momentum. Unfortunately for Kyiv, this was not available, but Sweden might be starting to change that. Sweden's assistance in creating a defense research institute for Ukraine could help with training its staff officers, preventing casualties, and ensuring more comprehensive operations at the brigade level, although this will take time to see results. It is time that Putin thinks he has on his side, but Sweden's coming aid...
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, this feels like a very long-term thing. Does Ukraine have that kind of time? Can Russia utilize things on its end? Because you can say many things about Russia, but if Russia goes to wartime economy, which is going, if it just all Russia does is like make military equipment and weapons, that's like a bit too heavy thing for Ukraine to fight against. Look at the artillery things. The level of artillery Russia makes, nobody in the planet can match in a way, right? So how long before people like, we can't give more artillery to Ukraine, and Ukraine literally lacks in that. Same thing applies to casualties, like loss of equipment, while Russia just basically goes to entire wartime economy, just like pumps out things, right? So I don't know. I think Ukraine knows this, and that's why very recently, like just a few hours ago, I saw the news of Ukraine basically attacking Russian territory now, where Putin basically called for like emergency meeting. And he's like, Ukraine is indiscriminately attacking places. Yeah, basically what you did. Like, you can't really complain about that, can you? But I'm pretty sure that was the news like that. But yeah,
it sends the message that he might be wrong. Ukraine is well on the way to killing or maiming 100,000 Russians this year, even though its forces may have been slowly giving ground. The end of Ukraine's shell hunger, partially with the ammunition Sweden is set to deliver, will help ensure Ukraine stays in the fight for the war of attrition and can get past the contentious American presidential election. Sweden has emerged from over 200 years of military neutrality with surprising speed, and while there may be doubts about the feasibility of continuing to aid Ukraine in the United States, in Sweden there are none. Sweden doesn't have the luxury of an ocean to separate it from its old enemy. For Stockholm, it's better to defeat Russia on foreign soil than potentially need to defeat it on soil or in waters close to home. Even proportionally large investments and temporary depletion of domestic arsenals have not dissuaded Sweden's leaders from this opinion. Putin may hope that many of the countries that now...
Because in history, whenever Sweden has went against Russia, it has not bore well for Sweden to chase Russia. Well, that's how that geography usually turns out. If somehow like major war does break out between Sweden and Russia, if Sweden, let's say, is become overpowered and like chases Russia somehow, it never bores well, right? Like somehow, like before even reaching Moscow, people like suffers a lot of casualties. Russia has like home turf advantage now. Russia always had that kind of strength. So Sweden's like it's better to help Ukraine than war reaches us type of way.
Oppose him will become exhausted with Ukraine over time and lose interest in continuing the effort. For deep historical reasons, Sweden is unlikely to be one of those countries, and that's important because it might be proportionally small, but it has a strong defense industry. It will also look bad if Sweden, the newest member of NATO and also one of its smaller participants, were to continue supporting Ukraine at significant cost to itself while the others did nothing. Sweden's support helps to ensure a broader European...
I mean, if Trump comes to power, I don't think he's going to give a fuck. He's just going to okay, yeah, I'm pulling up from NATO, lowering budget very bigly, like he says, right? He might do that, right? Because he already said he's probably going to do that.
An effort that could continue onward even if American aid falters. Sweden's historic decision to step up and deliver a significant blow to Russia through its aid packages marks a new chapter in the conflict. As NATO's newest member, Sweden's support highlights the unwavering commitment of Ukraine's allies to ensure regional stability and security. What impact will Sweden's aid have on the war dynamics? Only time will tell, but one thing is certain: Ukraine is not alone in its fight for freedom. What do you think of the support Sweden has lent to Ukraine?
What's there to think? It's a support. I mean, countries have been doing that. Now Sweden is joining the thing. Everybody has their own, agendas. Obviously, that's how things work. Things wouldn't be able to work if they didn't have their own agenda there, right? That's how anybody just scoffs at that. No, but that's you don't know how the world works, right? Global politics always ends up how does this benefit me? Right? And then helping the other. That is how it's supposed to happen. Because if you do it any other way, you just out of goodness of your heart or just a charitable gesture, you're going to stop doing that pretty fast because you're this is getting old. But if your own agenda is there, right? Oh, wait, by the way, I don't want Russia to be at my doorstep in Sweden, so I'm going to help Ukraine. You're going to help Ukraine for a long time. So that is a good way of doing it. So yeah, Sweden is Saab and everything, right? Sweden is known for, military complex, like he said. Surprisingly small defense budget for this kind of effective thing. Imagine if Sweden had $50 billion plus budget type of way, right? USA, hundreds of billions of dollars, spends. Russia is also, I think top 4 countries that spends more in budget is USA, China, Russia, and India, right? So compared to that, Sweden is really small, but their effect is insane, right? So yeah, all right, I'll see you next time.